The wind howled through Dry Creek like a banshee's wail, carrying dust and secrets through the narrow streets of this forgotten town. Inside Murphy's saloon, the air was thick with tobacco smoke and the bitter taste of cheap whiskey. Cowboys and drifters huddled around worn wooden tables, their voices rising above the tinny piano that played the same melancholy tune night after night. It was past 9 o'clock when the saloon doors burst open with such force that they slammed against the walls, silencing every conversation. A small figure stumbled through the entrance. A girl, no more than 12 years old, her brown hair matted with dirt and tears streaming down her pale cheeks. Her blue dress was torn at the sleeves, and clutched against her chest was a raggedy cloth doll, its button eyes hanging by threads. "Please," she cried, her voice cracking with desperation. "Someone has to help me. They took my brother." The girl collapsed to her knees on the sawdust-covered floor, her small body shaking with exhaustion and fear. The saloon patrons stared in uncomfortable silence, their eyes darting between the child and their drinks. Some shifted in their chairs, others looked away entirely. "They took Tommy," she sobbed. "The Black Ridge gang took my little brother because Papa couldn't pay what he owed. Please, someone has to help me get him back." A gruff voice from the back called out, "Girl, you best get on home before you cause more trouble than you can handle." Another patron muttered, "Black Ridge gang don't mess around. Kid's probably already—" "Don't say it," interrupted Martha, the saloon's only barmaid, shooting the man a warning glare. In the far corner of the saloon, shrouded in shadows, sat a man who had been nursing the same glass of whiskey for over an hour. His weathered hat was pulled low over his eyes, and his long coat bore the dust of many miles. This was the man the townspeople whispered about, the stranger who had arrived 3 months ago and taken up residence in the abandoned cabin on the outskirts of town. They called him Cowboy, though none knew his real name. Some said he was running from the law. Others claimed he was a former gunslinger trying to escape his past. What everyone agreed on was that he was trouble, and trouble was the last thing Dry Creek needed. The girl's sobs grew louder, more desperate. "My brother is only 8 years old. He's scared of the dark, and he needs his medicine for his breathing. Please, I'll do anything." Sheriff Morrison, a portly man with graying whiskers, finally stood from his table near the bar. "Now, child, you know I can't go up against Blackwood's gang. They got too many men, too many guns. It'd be suicide." "Then you're all cowards!" the girl screamed, her voice echoing through the silent saloon. "Every last one of you." The tension in the room was palpable. Men who had faced down rattlesnakes and wild horses couldn't meet the eyes of a desperate child. It was then that the stranger in the corner slowly rose from his chair. His boots made soft sounds against the wooden floor as he approached the girl, and every eye in the saloon followed his movement. Cowboy knelt beside the trembling child, his voice gentle but firm. "What's your name, little one?" "Sarah," she whispered, looking up at him with hope flickering in her tear-filled eyes. "Sarah Mitchell. Well, Sarah Mitchell, you tell me exactly what happened to your brother." The saloon erupted in protests. "Don't get involved, stranger," someone shouted. "Blackwood's gang will burn this whole town down if you cross them." Sheriff Morrison stepped forward, his hand resting on his gun. "Mister, I don't know who you are or where you come from, but you'd best stay out of this. The Black Ridge gang controls everything from here to the state line. They got hideouts in the mountains that nobody's ever found." Cowboy ignored the sheriff, keeping his attention on Sarah. Tell me about Tommy. He's my little brother, Sarah said, wiping her nose with her sleeve. After Mama died last winter, Papa started drinking real bad. He borrowed money from some men in town, but when he couldn't pay it back, they said he owed it to someone called Blackwood. Papa died 2 weeks ago in an accident at the mine, and today they came for Tommy. They said a boy could work off the debt in their camps. The stranger's jaw tightened, and for a moment something dangerous flashed in his eyes. How much did your father owe? $200, Sarah whispered. A collective gasp went through the saloon. $200 was more money than most of these men saw in a year. You're talking about riding into certain death, Sheriff Morrison said, his voice shaking slightly. Blackwood's got 20 men, maybe more. They got rifles, dynamite, and they know every inch of those mountains. Cowboy stood slowly, his hand moving to the gun at his hip, a worn Colt. .45 that looked like it had seen plenty of use. Sometimes a man's got to do what's right, regardless of the odds. And sometimes a man's got to think about the consequences, called out Doc Henderson, the town's physician. You go after Blackwood, and he'll come back here looking for revenge. You'll get us all killed. The stranger looked around the saloon, studying each face. So you're all content to let an 8-year-old boy disappear into the mountains with a gang of killers. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, an old-timer named Pete spoke up from his corner table. Stranger, you don't understand. 3 years ago, a group of men from Silver Falls tried to take on Blackwood. They found their bodies scattered across 10 miles of canyon. Blackwood don't just kill you. He makes an example of you. Cowboy's expression remained unchanged. Sarah, you said your brother needs medicine. What kind? For his lungs, she said. He can't breathe right when it gets cold or dusty. Doc Henderson makes it special for him. Doc Henderson shifted uncomfortably. The boy has asthma. Without his medicine, especially up in those cold mountains. He didn't finish the sentence. The stranger knelt down again, placing a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. I want you to listen to me very carefully. I'm going to get your brother back, but I need you to stay here in town where it's safe. Can you do that for me? Sarah's eyes widened with a mixture of hope and disbelief. You really mean it? You'll bring Tommy home? I give you my word. Sheriff Morrison stepped closer, lowering his voice. Mister, I don't know what kind of man you are, but this is madness. Even if you somehow managed to find their hideout, you'd be riding into a trap. Blackwood's been using those mountains for 5 years. He knows every cave, every trail, every place to set an ambush. The stranger stood and walked toward the saloon doors, pausing only to look back at the room full of frightened faces. Sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest thing to do. That doesn't make it any less right. As he pushed through the swinging doors, Sarah called out, Wait! I don't even know your name! He turned back, and for the first time that evening, something resembling a smile crossed his weathered features. Name's Cowboy, little miss, and I always keep my promises. The doors swung shut behind him, leaving the saloon in stunned silence. Outside, the wind continued to howl through the streets of Dry Creek, but now it carried something else along with the dust and secrets. It carried hope. The morning sun cast long shadows across Dry Creek as Cowboy prepared for his journey into the mountains. Word of his promise to Sarah had spread through the town like wildfire, and small clusters of people gathered on porches and street corners, whispering among themselves about the stranger's foolish bravery. At Morrison's general store, Cowboy purchased supplies, ammunition, dried beef, hardtack, and a small bottle of laudanum from Doc Henderson's medical supplies. The storekeeper, a nervous man named Willis, kept glancing toward the door as if expecting Blackwood's men to burst in at any moment. "You sure about this, mister?" Willis asked, his hands shaking as he wrapped the supplies. "Word is that Blackwood's already heard about what happened last night. He don't take kindly to folks interfering with his business." Cowboy placed a $20 gold piece on the counter. "Keep the change, and if I don't make it back, make sure Sarah gets whatever's left." As he stepped outside, Cowboy found Sarah waiting by his horse, a sturdy black stallion that looked as weathered and experienced as its owner. The girl had cleaned herself up and was wearing a fresh dress, but her eyes still held the desperate hope of someone clinging to their last chance. "I want to come with you," she said firmly. "Tommy's my brother. I should be the one to save him." Cowboy knelt down to her level, his voice gentle but firm. "Sarah, what I'm about to do is going to be dangerous, more dangerous than anything you can imagine. The best way you can help your brother is by staying here and staying safe. But what if something happens to you? What if you don't come back?" Before Cowboy could answer, a voice called out from across the street. "He won't be coming back, little girl, and neither will your brother." They turned to see a man approaching, tall, lean, with cold gray eyes and a scar running from his left ear to the corner of his mouth. This was Jake Morrison, the sheriff's younger brother, and one of the few men in town who wasn't afraid to speak his mind about Blackwood's gang. "Jake Morrison," the man introduced himself to Cowboy, "I reckon you're either the bravest man I've ever met or the dumbest. Either way, you're about to get yourself killed and probably take half this town with you when Blackwood comes looking for revenge." Cowboy stood slowly, his hand instinctively moving closer to his gun. "You got something to say? Say it." Jake's eyes narrowed. "I got plenty to say, like how convenient it is that a stranger shows up in our town just when we need a hero, like how nobody knows where you came from or why you're really here. For all we know, you're working with Blackwood yourself." A small crowd had gathered, drawn by the tension in Jake's voice. Among them was Martha from the saloon, Doc Henderson, and several other townspeople who had witnessed the previous night's events. "That's enough, Jake," Sheriff Morrison said, approaching from the direction of his office. "Man's got a right to make his own choices, even if they're foolish ones." Jake laughed bitterly. "Foolish? Brother, this goes way beyond foolish. This is suicide. And when Blackwood's men come riding down from those mountains looking for payback, it'll be our wives and children who pay the price." Cowboy's expression remained calm, but there was something in his eyes that made Jake take a step back. "You seem to know an awful lot about how Blackwood thinks. Makes a man wonder." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Jake's face flushed red with anger. "You calling me a traitor? I'm not calling you anything. Just making an observation." Before the confrontation could escalate further, Doc Henderson stepped between them. "This isn't helping anyone. The boy's still out there, and every minute we waste arguing is another minute he's in danger." Cowboy nodded and turned back to his horse, checking his rifle and making sure his gear was secure. As he worked, Sarah tugged at his coat. "Mr. Cowboy, there's something I didn't tell you last night, something important." He looked down at her, seeing the fear and uncertainty in her young eyes. "What is it, Sarah?" "When they took Tommy, one of the men, he said something to the other one. He said they weren't just taking him for the debt. He said Blackwood had special plans for him." A chill ran down Cowboy's spine. "What kind of special plans?" "I don't know. But the way he said it, it scared me more than anything else." Cowboy's jaw tightened. In his years of dealing with outlaws and criminals, He had learned that men like Blackwood often had uses for children that went far beyond simple labor. The thought made his blood run cold. "Sarah, I need you to think very carefully. Did you recognize any of the men who took Tommy? Had you seen them in town before?" The girl nodded slowly. "One of them. He looked familiar. I think I've seen him talking to—" She glanced around nervously at the gathered crowd. "To who, Sarah?" "To Mr. Jake. I saw them talking behind the saloon about a week ago. They were being real quiet, like they didn't want anyone to hear." Jake Morrison's face went pale. "That's a lie. I've never talked to any of Blackwood's men." But the damage was done. The crowd began murmuring among themselves, casting suspicious glances at Jake. Sheriff Morrison looked at his brother with a mixture of confusion and growing suspicion. "Jake, you want to explain what the girl's talking about?" "There's nothing to explain. She's just a scared kid making things up." Cowboy studied Jake's face carefully. In his experience, innocent men didn't get that defensive that quickly. "Sarah, can you describe the man you saw talking to Jake? He was tall and thin, with a black mustache, and he had a gold tooth right here," she said, pointing to her front tooth. Doc Henderson gasped. "That sounds like Charlie Brennan. He used to work at the mine before he disappeared about 6 months ago. Rumor was he joined up with some outlaw gang." The pieces were starting to fall into place. Cowboy looked directly at Jake Morrison. "Seems like you've got some explaining to do." Jake's hand moved toward his gun, but he stopped when he realized that half the town was watching him. Instead, he pointed an accusing finger at Cowboy. "You're trying to turn this town against itself. For all we know, you're the one working with Blackwood." "If I was working with Blackwood, why would I be riding into the mountains to rescue the boy?" "Maybe because it's all part of some bigger plan. Maybe you're leading us into a trap." The crowd was growing more agitated, voices rising as neighbors began to eye each other with suspicion. It was exactly the kind of chaos that would benefit someone like Blackwood. A divided town was a weak town. Sheriff Morrison raised his hands for quiet. "That's enough. Jake, you're coming with me to the office. We're going to have a long talk about your recent activities. You can't arrest me based on the word of a hysterical child." "I'm not arresting you. Yet. But I am going to get some answers." As the sheriff led his protesting brother away, Cowboy mounted his horse. The crowd began to disperse, but not before casting worried glances at both the stranger and each other. Trust, once broken, was not easily repaired. Sarah looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause trouble. I just want my brother back." Cowboy leaned down from his saddle. "You did the right thing, Sarah. Sometimes the truth causes trouble, but that doesn't make it any less important. Will you really bring Tommy home?" "I gave you my word, and I always keep my promises." As he rode toward the mountains, Cowboy couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this situation than a simple kidnapping for debt. The connection between Jake Morrison and Blackwood's gang suggested something deeper, a conspiracy that might involve more people in Dry Creek than anyone suspected. The trail into the mountains was treacherous, winding through narrow passes and steep ravines. But Cowboy had ridden worse trails in his time, and he knew how to read the signs that other men missed. Broken branches, disturbed rocks, horse droppings, all told the story of recent passage. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, he began to notice something else. He was being followed. The sounds were subtle. A horse's whinny carried on the wind, the distant clatter of hooves on stone. But they were there. Someone was tracking him, staying just far enough back to avoid detection. Cowboy smiled grimly. If Jake Morrison thought he could lead Blackwood's men to him, He was about to learn a hard lesson about underestimating a stranger. The game was just beginning, and Cowboy had been playing it longer than most men had been alive. 3 hours into the mountain trail, Cowboy confirmed his suspicions. He was definitely being followed. The sounds of pursuit had grown more careless, suggesting either overconfidence or desperation on the part of his trackers. He decided it was time to turn the tables. Finding a narrow canyon with high walls on both sides, Cowboy dismounted and led his horse into a hidden alcove behind a cluster of boulders. From this vantage point, he had a clear view of the trail while remaining completely concealed. He didn't have to wait long. 2 riders appeared around the bend, moving cautiously but steadily along his trail. One was Jake Morrison, just as Cowboy had suspected. The other was a stranger, a thin man with a black mustache and, when he smiled, the glint of a gold tooth. This had to be Charlie Brennan, the man Sarah had described. Cowboy waited until they were directly below his position before stepping out onto a ledge above them, his rifle trained on the pair. "That's far enough, gentlemen." Both men's horses reared in surprise. Jake's hand went for his gun, but stopped when he saw the rifle barrel pointed directly at his chest. "Easy there, Jake. No need for anyone to get hurt. Yet." Charlie Brennan, showing more composure than his companion, slowly raised his hands. "Well, well, the famous stranger everyone's talking about. Blackwood's been real curious about you." "Has he now? And what exactly has he been curious about?" "Oh, you know. Who you are, where you came from, why you're so interested in helping that little girl." Charlie's gold tooth gleamed as he smiled. "Funny thing is, when Jake here described you to us, Blackwood got real excited. Said you sounded familiar." A cold knot formed in Cowboy's stomach, but his expression remained unchanged. "Can't say I've had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Blackwood." "Maybe not recently," Charlie said, "but Blackwood's got a real good memory for faces, especially faces of men who've crossed him before." Jake Morrison found his voice. "Look, mister, I don't know what game you're playing, but you're in way over your head. Blackwood's got the boy, and he's got 20 men with rifles. You ride into that camp, and you're a dead man." "Where is the camp, Jake?" "I'm not telling you nothing." Cowboy shifted his aim slightly, and his rifle cracked. The bullet struck the ground inches from Jake's horse's hooves, causing the animal to dance nervously. "That was a warning shot. The next one won't be." Charlie Brennan laughed. "You got spirit, stranger. I'll give you that. But you're making a big mistake. See, Blackwood didn't just send us to follow you. He sent us to deliver a message. I'm listening. He's willing to make a trade. The boy for you. Seems like you're worth more to him than some kid with breathing problems." The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together in Cowboy's mind, and he didn't like the picture they were forming. "What makes me so valuable to Blackwood? That's between you and him. But I'll tell you this much. He knows who you really are, and he knows what you did 5 years ago. 5 years ago." The words hit Cowboy like a physical blow, bringing back memories he had tried desperately to bury. The fire, the screams, the children who didn't make it out, the town that blamed him for everything that went wrong. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. Charlie's smile widened. "Sure you do. You're Thomas Garrett, aren't you? The man who burned down the orphanage in Cedar Ridge. The man who killed 12 children." Jake Morrison's eyes widened in shock and horror. "Jesus Christ! You're the Cedar Ridge killer." "That's not what happened," Cowboy said quietly, but the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Doesn't matter what really happened," Charlie said. What matters is what people believe. And when word gets out that the Cedar Ridge killer is in Dry Creek, well, let's just say you won't be welcome anywhere. The truth was more complicated than either man knew, but Cowboy had learned long ago that the truth was often less important than perception. 5 years ago, he had been Thomas Garrett, deputy sheriff of Cedar Ridge. He had been investigating reports of children disappearing from the local orphanage when the building caught fire during his search. He had managed to save 8 children, but 12 others had perished in the flames. The official investigation had cleared him of any wrongdoing, but the grieving townspeople needed someone to blame. Rumors began to spread that he had set the fire to cover up evidence of his own crimes, that he was involved with the men who had been taking the children. The rumors became whispers, the whispers became accusations, and eventually Thomas Garrett had been forced to leave Cedar Ridge in the middle of the night. He had become Cowboy, a drifter with no past and no future, moving from town to town and trying to outrun the ghosts that followed him. Blackwood was behind the disappearances in Cedar Ridge, wasn't he? Cowboy asked. Charlie's smile confirmed his suspicion. Smart man. Yeah, Blackwood had a nice little operation going there. Kids are valuable commodities if you know the right buyers. You almost ruined everything with your investigation. So he burned down the orphanage to destroy the evidence and to frame you in the process. 2 birds, 1 stone. Blackwood's always been efficient like that. The rage that had been building in Cowboy's chest finally found its voice. Those children died because of him. And now you got a chance to save one. All you got to do is trade yourself for the boy. Blackwood gets his revenge, the kid goes free, and everybody's happy. Except me. Well, yeah, except you. Cowboy considered his options. He could shoot both men right here and continue his search for Blackwood's camp, but that would likely result in Tommy's death. Or he could agree to the trade and hope that he could find a way to escape before Blackwood killed him. There was a third option, but it was the most dangerous of all. Tell Blackwood I'll make the trade, he said finally. But I want to see the boy first. I want proof that he's alive and unharmed. Charlie nodded. Fair enough. There's an old mining camp about 5 miles north of here. Sunset Ridge, they used to call it. Meet us there at sundown. Come alone and come unarmed. And if I don't show up, then the boy dies, and Blackwood comes looking for you anyway. Only difference is, he'll burn down Dry Creek in the process. Cowboy lowered his rifle. Sundown it is. As the 2 men rode away, Cowboy remained on the ledge, staring out at the vast expanse of mountains before him. Somewhere in those peaks, an 8-year-old boy was waiting for rescue, probably scared and sick, and wondering if anyone was coming for him. But now Cowboy knew the truth. This wasn't just about a debt or a kidnapping. This was about his past catching up with him, about the children he had failed to save 5 years ago, and about a man named Blackwood who seemed to take pleasure in destroying innocent lives. He thought about Sarah, waiting in Dry Creek with hope in her eyes. He thought about the townspeople who had already begun to suspect him of being something he wasn't. And he thought about Tommy, a little boy who was paying the price for crimes he had never committed. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, Cowboy made his decision. He would go to Sunset Ridge, but not as a lamb to the slaughter. He would go as Thomas Garrett, the man who had once sworn to protect the innocent, even if it cost him everything. The game was far from over, and Blackwood was about to learn that some men were harder to kill than others. The abandoned mining camp at Sunset Ridge looked like a graveyard of broken dreams. Weathered wooden buildings leaned against each other for support, their windows dark and empty. Rusted mining equipment lay scattered across the ground, like the bones of some massive beast, and the whole place carried the smell of decay and abandonment. Cowboy arrived just as the sun touched the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. He had spent the afternoon preparing for what he knew would be the most important confrontation of his life. Hidden in various places around his body were 3 small knives, a Derringer pistol, and a stick of dynamite he had taken from an abandoned mine shaft along the trail. As he rode into the camp, he counted at least 15 men positioned around the buildings, more than Charlie Brennan had mentioned, but not unexpected. Blackwood was clearly taking no chances. The man himself stood in front of the largest building, a tall figure in a black coat with silver hair and cold blue eyes. Even at a distance, Cowboy could see the cruel intelligence in that gaze, the look of a man who viewed human life as nothing more than a commodity to be bought and sold. "Thomas Garrett," Blackwood called out as Cowboy dismounted. "Or do you prefer Cowboy these days? Where's the boy?" Blackwood smiled and gestured toward the building behind him. "Safe and sound, for now, though I have to say he's been asking for his medicine quite a bit. Seems like the mountain air doesn't agree with him." 2 of Blackwood's men emerged from the building, carrying a small figure between them. Tommy Mitchell was pale and shaking, his breathing labored and his eyes wide with fear. But he was alive. "Tommy!" Cowboy called out. "Are you hurt?" The boy tried to answer, but a coughing fit seized him, leaving him gasping for air. Doc Henderson had been right. Without his medicine, the mountain altitude was slowly killing him. "As you can see," Blackwood said, "time is not on the boy's side. Shall we get down to business? Let him go first. I'm afraid that's not how this works. You see, Thomas, I've been waiting 5 years for this moment. 5 years to settle the score for what you did to my operation in Cedar Ridge." "You mean what you did? You're the one who burned down that orphanage. You're the one who killed those children." Blackwood's smile never wavered. "Prove it." "Oh, that's right. You can't. Because all the evidence went up in flames, along with the only witnesses who could have testified against me. The children you didn't kill, remember. The ones I saved." "The ones you saved?" Blackwood laughed. "Is that what you tell yourself? That you're some kind of hero? You failed, Thomas. You failed to stop me. You failed to save those children, and you failed to prove your innocence. And now you're about to fail again." Cowboy's hand moved slowly toward his hidden weapons, but stopped when he saw the rifles trained on Tommy. Any sudden movement would result in the boy's death. "What do you want, Blackwood?" "Justice. You cost me a very profitable operation in Cedar Ridge. You forced me to relocate, to rebuild, to start over. Do you have any idea how much money that cost me? So this is about money. This is about respect, about making sure that no one ever interferes with my business again. When word gets out that I killed the famous Cedar Ridge killer, it will send a message to every lawman and do-gooder from here to California." It was then that Cowboy noticed something that gave him hope. Among Blackwood's men, he recognized a face, Jake Morrison, but the man looked terrified rather than confident. More importantly, Jake kept glancing toward the ridge above the camp, as if expecting something. "You seem nervous, Jake," Cowboy called out. "Something bothering you?" Jake's face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about." Blackwood turned to look at his informant with growing suspicion. "Jake, is there something you'd like to share with the rest of us?" Before Jake could answer, the sound of approaching horses echoed through the canyon. Blackwood's men immediately raised their weapons, scanning the ridges for threats. "Expecting company?" Cowboy asked. Blackwood's confident demeanor cracked slightly. "Jake, what did you do?" I had to tell them. They would have figured it out anyway." The first rider to appear on the ridge was Sheriff Morrison, followed by Doc Henderson, Martha from the saloon, and a dozen other townspeople from Dry Creek. They were all armed and they had the high ground. "Let the boy go, Blackwood!" Sheriff Morrison called down. "You're surrounded!" Blackwood's face twisted with rage. "You double-crossing snake! I should have known better than to trust a Morrison." "My brother made a mistake," the sheriff replied. "But he came to me this afternoon and told me everything. About how you've been using him to gather information about the town, about your plans to expand your operation into Dry Creek, about the children you've been taking." The pieces finally fell into place for Cowboy. Blackwood hadn't just been running a kidnapping operation. He had been building a network to supply children to buyers across the territory. Dry Creek was supposed to be his next base of operations, with Jake Morrison as his inside man. "You're finished, Blackwood," Cowboy said. "Even if you kill me, you'll never make it out of these mountains alive." "Maybe not," Blackwood replied, pulling out his gun and pointing it at Tommy. "But I can make sure you watch this boy die before I go." It was the moment Cowboy had been waiting for. As Blackwood's attention focused on Tommy, Cowboy drew one of his hidden knives and threw it with deadly precision. The blade caught Blackwood in the wrist, causing him to drop his gun and cry out in pain. The camp erupted in gunfire as Blackwood's men opened fire on the townspeople above, but they were at a severe disadvantage. The people of Dry Creek had positioned themselves well, with clear lines of sight and plenty of cover. In the chaos, Cowboy dove toward Tommy, scooping up the boy and carrying him toward the shelter of an overturned mining cart. Tommy was barely conscious, his breathing so labored that Cowboy feared the boy might not survive, even if they escaped. "Hold on, Tommy," he whispered. "Your sister sent me to bring you home." "Sarah?" Tommy gasped. Is Sarah okay?" "She's fine. She's waiting for you in Dry Creek." The battle was brief but intense. Blackwood's men, caught between the townspeople above and Cowboy's unexpected resistance, quickly found themselves outgunned and outmaneuvered. One by one, they threw down their weapons and surrendered. Blackwood himself, clutching his wounded wrist, made a desperate attempt to escape on horseback. But as he rode toward the canyon's exit, a single shot rang out from the ridge above. The outlaw leader tumbled from his saddle and lay still in the dust. Sheriff Morrison lowered his smoking rifle. "That was for all the children," he said quietly. As the smoke cleared and the echoes of gunfire faded, Doc Henderson scrambled down from the ridge with his medical bag. He immediately began treating Tommy's breathing difficulties, administering the medicine the boy so desperately needed. "He'll be fine," the doctor assured Cowboy. "A few days of rest and proper care and he'll be good as new." The townspeople of Dry Creek gathered around Cowboy, their faces showing a mixture of respect and gratitude. These were the same people who had been afraid to help a desperate child just 24 hours earlier, but they had found their courage when it mattered most. "Why did you come?" Cowboy asked Sheriff Morrison. "Because Jake told us the truth about who you really are," the sheriff replied. "About what really happened in Cedar Ridge. About how you tried to save those children, and how Blackwood framed you for his own crimes." Jake Morrison stepped forward, his face filled with shame. "I'm sorry. I was scared, and Blackwood promised me money if I helped him. But when I saw what kind of man he really was, what he was planning to do to this town. I couldn't go through with it. It takes courage to admit your mistakes, Cowboy said, and even more courage to try to make them right. As they prepared to leave Sunset Ridge, Tommy Mitchell looked up at Cowboy with clear, grateful eyes. Thank you for keeping your promise. What promise was that? Sarah said you promised to bring me home. She said you always keep your promises. Cowboy smiled, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders that he had been carrying for 5 long years. That's right, son. I always keep my promises. The ride back to Dry Creek was triumphant, with Tommy riding in front of Cowboy on his horse and the townspeople surrounding them like an honor guard. As they crested the final hill before town, they could see Sarah waiting in the street, her small figure silhouetted against the setting sun. When she saw her brother, she ran toward them with tears of joy streaming down her face. Tommy slid down from the horse and into his sister's arms, and for a moment, all was right with the world. That evening, as the town celebrated their victory over Blackwood's gang, Sheriff Morrison approached Cowboy with an offer. "We could use a good deputy in Dry Creek," he said. "Someone with your experience and your sense of justice." Cowboy considered the offer, looking around at the faces of the people who had once feared him, but now called him friend. For the first time in 5 years, he felt like he might have found a place where Thomas Garrett could finally come home. "I'd be honored," he said. And as the stars came out over Dry Creek, Sarah and Tommy Mitchell sat on their front porch, safe and together, while their guardian angel, no longer a stranger, no longer running from his past, began the first day of his new life as the town's protector. The mysterious rancher had found his redemption, the children had found their safety, and Dry Creek had found its hero. Sometimes, when the darkness seems overwhelming, all it takes is one person willing to stand up and do what's right. Sometimes that's enough to change everything. Hello? How are you? Did you enjoy the story? Like, share, comment on which city you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel to help us continue adding new amazing videos. Thank you very much, and come back often.